So, I've been watching Midas Touch, and I've been watching Tennessee Brando. And he ended up going ahead and mentioning the factor that he believes that drug dealers should be executed. Day one, just one. And ultimately understand that heavy-handed approach is not going to help anything. If anything, it's going to make it absolutely worse. Way worse. All right? When it comes down to actual drug reform, here's how you do it. All right, first off, Department of Justice has to go ahead and clarify and show, and document, as well as give a documentation of every roadside drug screening that ends up getting used because of the failure count that there is for the subpar tests that were used to go ahead and get convictions, that ended up going ahead and leading to the mass incarceration that ended up being called the war on drugs. All right. Second thing, with that, have to also go ahead and have individual, forensic kits, roadside forensic kits. All right. If there is any actual, hypothetical drugs that exist in the situation. All right. The baggie. All right. The outside of the baggie. And I know you're saying, could use gloves. Remember, disposing of the gloves, ultimately, that's going to go ahead and leave a trace, and considering the factor of the cell phone, geographic location, ultimately, it gets documented regardless every time you end up going ahead and passing a cell tower, whether your phone's connected, active or not active, disconnected or connected, doesn't matter. All right. So, ultimately, first thing, no making assumptions about, possession, because remember, having to prove that case, ultimately, it's not your job to go ahead and prove that case. It's the job of the prosecutors to go ahead and make the case of, why they should go ahead and prosecute you, or why they shouldn't prosecute you. All right? Not to mention that, ultimately, factors need to get remembered. Don't want to follow your Fourth Amendment rights, when violated. Ultimately, if somebody's trying to go ahead and run a breach of wiretap laws, because remember, in order to be able to get a warrant for a wiretap, you need to go ahead and get a FISA warrant. In order to get a FISA warrant, there needs to be a substantiated, credible threat to national security. All right? Ultimately, remember, too, there's interconnection with the bureaus, and I think people tend to forget the factor that the IRS, the Secret Service, as well as the, the Mint, Fort Knox, they all run, together. All right. Then ultimately you end up having the variables that end up going ahead and playing it in with the DEA. All right. Drug Enforcement Agency goes ahead and determines if, something is property that had been obtained, through the proceeds of a crime, literally it is multiple bureaus going ahead and combing through together with a fine-tooth comb. And the funny thing is, people wonder, there's got to be some way to game that system. There's no ways that could be exploited or extorted. By the way, also, with the sending out of every kit, that has to have the reference number and everything, with the reference number also directly handed to the person, at the beginning of the investigation, as well as a full documentation that at any point in time throughout the proceeding of the investigation, the person is actively able to go ahead and hey, so these are some things that we got, as well as these are some rumors that we've heard. All right. Ultimately, if the person ends up going ahead and talking to the investigator, that really is their choice. But any evidence obtained through wiretapping loopholes, that end up going ahead and running afoul of the 1986 Telecommunication Act, like, for example, going ahead and trying to intercept connections, slow walk somebody's, literally going ahead and the manipulation of somebody's devices, without an official warrant to get access remotely through a remote access, application. Now, keep in mind with the remote access application, ultimately, it is not allowed to be an overbroad scope. All right. Not allowed to mince words. Ultimately need to use direct words. All right. When it comes down to a confession or anything, it needs to be known that it wasn't gained under, coercion, not under duress. Ultimately, too, another factor that needs to get remembered is that information obtained, through means of torture does end up going ahead and being deemed uncredible, So, anything that would end up going ahead and missing the discovery phase or the exploratory phase, it doesn't matter where the depositions are going or anything. It's like, hey, statements are gotten whether you like it or not. We got ways of making you talk whether you like it or not. How it gets used, you'll find out if that's your business or not when when the time comes around to when we decide if or when. All right? But when it comes down to actually preventing drug trafficking, ultimately, like I said, forensic roadside kit needs to be brought, dusted for fingerprints. If there are no fingerprints, ultimately, going ahead and seeing who was attached to the vehicle. When it comes to attached to the vehicle, who's actually going ahead and financing the bills, like, for example, who's paying the vehicle tax, who's, handling the registration, who ended up going ahead and making payments towards the vehicle that, ultimately, would be deemed crime. And keep in mind, too, understand it is unconstitutional not to tell somebody what they're being accused of. So if you don't tell somebody what they're being accused of, while simultaneously trying to run a covert investigation, that's just going to have to get tossed right the fuck out the window. Not to mention that, but motive means intent for anybody that ends up trying to be a concerned citizen, or neighborhood watch Nightwing Duck or Darkwing Duck. Basically, the point on this situation is, if there's an investigation being done on you, you won't know. When will you know? You'll know when you get thrown the fucking cuffs regardless. Where the fuck you get sent, that ain't your business. Above your pay grade. All right? What ends up being done with your work, that's none of your business. How far did the investigation end up going ahead and stretching? Ultimately, everything gathered during the fact finder and the procedural aspect, that's none of your business. Why is it none of my business? Because you're considered a contractor. Okay, considered a contractor while simultaneously wanting to bring to court and debate why you should not have to pay me for the work that I already did, while simultaneously wanting to claim the work, while also not wanting to run afoul of intellectual properties and, credit when it comes to the building of the case and the story, but yeah, absolutely, you should be able to go ahead and get credit for somebody else's investigation. And the funny thing is, you have done such a good job proving that you were the one that did the work, that the funny thing is, the same thing that every teacher that ended up finding out that wanted to disregard and pretend like didn't do the work just because it was done in a different setting, while at the same time later on finding out, oh, it did end up landing on my desk, fully completed. Shit. So this whole situation is fucked in my career, son, because of the factor that I can't even go ahead and manage to keep my fucking paperwork together. So yeah, imagine losing 10 years of your life because some fuckwad ended up going ahead and knocking down some papers out of your hand, thinking that they were Billy Badass trying to be a fucking nuisance, while at the same time, 10 years later, you find out, oh yeah, no, that 10 years worth of work you did, it's valid. Criminal prosecutions and referrals are going and being made and everything. Investigation-wise, it'll be a year down the road to find out anything. But, yeah, no, your sources were verified. Your work was very good and everything. And, oh, yeah, by the way, when it comes down to the credit for your work, the only reason I don't want to give you credit for your work is because I don't want to have to pay you for your work, despite the fact that you already did work. It's like, well, I can tell you right now, an investigatory panel, they're probably going to go ahead and do something like, set up a back channel to go ahead and get depositions and ultimately take a look and gander at what's there, because wireless technology, you don't need to be in the same fucking room to go ahead and be able to coordinate an investigation together. So, ultimately, oh yeah, by the way, just to let you know, you were right, Do you know who it was that didn't want you to be right? Your fucking kidnappers. So now when it comes down to the whole decision on prosecution and everything, ultimately, you shouldn't get a say on leniency or clemency or anything like that. You've been through enough. In the process of trying to get this done, there was 5 attempts to murder you. And even with, you still relented on. You got a hell of a lot bigger balls than most people would know. No, not bigger balls. Just at this point, feel like I'm dead but too stupid to lay down.